David Sterling had been staring at the same blank communication log for 20 minutes when the soft chime of the airlock reminded him that his shift with Subject Phi was about to begin. He rubbed his eyes, trying to push away the fatigue that had become his constant companion since being assigned to the Xena Communication project 3 weeks ago. The research station New Byzantium hummed around him with the familiar sounds of life support systems and distant conversations, but Section C remained eerily quiet. That's where they kept her, the alien woman who had arrived unconscious in an escape pod that had drifted into Earth's orbital traffic patterns like a message in a bottle from the deepest ocean of space. Any progress to report? Dr. Elena Vasquez asked as she met David in the corridor outside the containment area. The xenolinguist looked as tired as David felt, her usually perfect hair showing signs of the same stress that kept everyone on the project running on coffee and determination. She watches everything, David replied, pulling up his notes on his tablet. Responds to emotional cues, seems to understand basic concepts, but still no verbal communication. Not even attempts at mimicking sounds. The neural scans show incredible activity during your sessions, Dr. Vasquez said, walking alongside him toward the observation chamber. Her brain patterns are unlike anything we've catalogued. The complexity suggests intelligence far beyond human baseline, but the organization is completely alien. Through the reinforced transparent aluminum, David could see her sitting in what had become her usual position, cross-legged on the floor near the viewport, looking out at the stars with an expression that seemed to carry infinite sadness. She was beautiful in a way that made David think of winter mornings and deep ocean currents, her skin the pale blue of Arctic ice, her hair silver as starlight and flowing past her shoulders like liquid metal. But it was her eyes that captured everyone's attention, large and luminous. They shifted through colors like aurora displays, cycling from deep violet to brilliant gold to ocean blue. Subject Phi, Dr. Vasquez said as they entered the chamber, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of scientific observation. David is here for your afternoon session. The alien turned toward them with fluid grace, her color-shifting eyes focusing on David's face with an intensity that always made him feel like she was reading something written in his expression. She inclined her head slightly, a gesture David had come to interpret as acknowledgement, though he suspected it carried more meaning than simple recognition. Hello, David said, settling into the chair he'd claimed as his own over the past weeks. I brought something new today. He pulled out a small music player and a collection of headphones, noting how her eyes immediately fixed on the devices with what looked like curiosity. Over their sessions, he discovered that she responded most strongly to things that required cooperation or emotional connection, art created by multiple people, photographs of families, collaborative music. These are for listening to music, he explained, demonstrating how the headphones worked. Different sounds that humans create to express feelings. She watched his demonstration with the focused attention of someone trying to decode a complex puzzle, her head tilted at an angle that somehow conveyed both intelligence and patience. When he offered her the headphones, she accepted them with careful hands, her fingers long and delicate, with an extra joint that made her movements seem almost hypnotically graceful, exploring the device's surface with gentle curiosity. David started with something simple, a classical piece featuring strings and piano. Her eyes widened as the music began, cycling rapidly through colors as if each note triggered a different emotional response. She closed her eyes, and for a moment her face showed an expression of such profound longing that David felt his chest tighten with sympathetic emotion. You understand music, he said softly. Your people must have something similar. Her eyes opened and focused on his face, and for just a moment David could have sworn he felt something, not quite a voice, but an impression, like an echo of sadness and loss that seemed to resonate in his mind before fading away. David, came Dr. Vasquez's voice through his earpiece, are you getting any of this? Her neural activity just spiked to levels we've never recorded. I'm getting something, David replied quietly, not wanting to break whatever moment was developing. But I'm not sure what. The alien reached out slowly, her movements deliberate and careful, and gently touched the music player. The device flickered, its display showing patterns that definitely weren't part of its normal operation. After a few seconds, music began playing from the device's speakers, but it wasn't any of the songs David had loaded onto it. The sound was unlike anything human musicians had ever created, layering harmonics that seemed to bypass the ears and speak directly to the nervous system. It was beautiful and alien and heartbreaking all at once, carrying emotions that felt familiar yet impossible to name. "She's interfacing with the technology somehow," Dr. Vasquez whispered through the comm. "The music appears to be coming from her own neural patterns, translated through the device." David stared at the alien woman, whose eyes were now flowing with colors he'd never seen before, deep purples that seemed to hold the memory of distant suns, golds that carried the warmth of home fires, blues that spoke of endless space and the loneliness of traveling between stars. "This is your music," he said, understanding flooding through him. "From your world." She nodded once, a gesture so human and yet so graceful that it somehow emphasized her alien nature rather than disguising it. The music continued to flow from the device, and David found himself thinking of empty spaces between stars, of ships traveling impossible distances, of people scattered across the void searching for each other. "You're lost," he said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "You're not just far from home, you're separated from your family." Her eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made him feel transparent, as if she were seeing not just his current thoughts but every experience that had shaped him. The music from the device grew softer, more intimate, and David felt that strange echo in his mind again, not words, but the impression of gratitude mixed with profound loneliness. "David," Dr. Vasquez's voice carried urgency now, "you need to see this. The station's AI is picking up quantum fluctuations throughout Section C. She's not just interfacing with the music player, she's connecting to every electronic system in the area." David looked around the chamber, noticing for the first time that the lighting had changed, becoming warmer and softer. The environmental controls were cycling through patterns that created gentle air currents, and the wall displays were showing star patterns that definitely weren't from Earth's databases. "You're making this place feel more like home," he said in wonder. "But why?" The alien woman stood with that same fluid grace, moving to the viewport where she'd spent so many hours staring out at space. She pressed her palm against the transparent aluminum, and the view shifted, not physically, but somehow the stars looked different, arranged in patterns that spoke of navigation routes and safe harbors rather than cold, distant lights. She turned back to David and made a gesture he'd seen before but never understood, touching her heart, then extending her hand toward him, palm up. This time, though, he thought he understood what she was trying to say. "You're sharing," he said softly. "Making this place comfortable for both of us." Her smile was subtle, just a slight upturn at the corners of her mouth, but it transformed her entire face. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked less like a beautiful alien specimen and more like a young woman trying to find her place in an unfamiliar world. David reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and gently placed his hand over hers where it rested on the viewport. Her skin was warm despite its alien appearance, and the moment they made contact he felt that echo in his mind intensify, carrying impressions of gratitude, hope, and something that felt remarkably like friendship. "My name is David Sterling," he said, speaking slowly and clearly. "I know you understand that. And I want you to know that you're safe here. We're not going to hurt you." Her eyes shifted to deep violet, a color he was beginning to associate with her more contemplative moods. She tilted her head in that questioning gesture, and David had the distinct impression that she was asking something important, though he couldn't quite grasp what. "She's trying to tell you something," Dr. Vasquez said through the comm. "The neural patterns suggest she's making some kind of decision." The alien woman looked directly into David's eyes, her expression carrying an intensity that seemed to look straight through to his soul. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, her brow furrowing with what looked like internal conflict. "It's okay," David said gently. "You don't have to say anything you don't want to. I know communication is different for your people." She nodded once, her expression shifting to something that looked almost like relief. Then she did something that surprised him. She pointed to herself, then to David, then made a gesture that encompassed the entire chamber, as if indicating that this shared space had become something significant. "I understand," David said, though he wasn't entirely sure he did. "This is ours now. Our place to figure things out together." Her smile returned, brighter this time, and David felt that strange resonance in his mind grow stronger, carrying with it the unmistakable impression that yes, he had understood correctly, and that somehow, in the span of a single session, everything between them had changed. As the alien music continued to play from the modified device, creating a soundtrack for the first real moment of connection between human and alien minds, David realized that maybe breakthrough wasn't about getting her to speak human words. Maybe it was about learning to understand the language she'd been speaking all along. 2 weeks had passed since the music session, and David found himself looking forward to his time with the alien woman in ways that probably weren't entirely professional. Dr. Vasquez had started calling their interactions empathic communication events, which David thought was a fancy way of saying that they'd figured out how to be friends without using words. "The neural resonance patterns are becoming more sophisticated," Dr. Vasquez explained as they walked toward Section C, her tablet displaying brain scan data that looked like abstract art. "She's not just responding to your emotional states anymore, she's actively modulating her own to create harmony with yours. It's like she's learned to tune herself to your mental frequency." David wasn't entirely sure how he felt about that description. "Is that safe? For either of us?" "Unknown," Dr. Vasquez admitted. "But the effects seem positive. Your stress indicators actually improve during these sessions, and her neural activity suggests something analogous to contentment or satisfaction." Commander Lisa Park met them at the security checkpoint, her expression carrying the perpetual frustration of someone trying to run a military operation around a scientific mystery. "Sterling, I need to brief you on some new developments. We've got pressure from Earth Command for faster progress." "What kind of pressure?" David asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. "The kind that involves words like strategic value and technological assessment," Park replied grimly. "There are people back home who think we're being too gentle with our approach." David felt something cold settle in his stomach. "She's not a weapon to be analyzed, Commander. She's a refugee who's been separated from her family." "That's your interpretation," Park said. "Others see an alien with apparent technopathic abilities who could interface with our systems in ways we don't understand. The fact that she chooses to remain silent makes some people nervous." "Maybe she has good reasons for staying quiet," David replied, thinking about the way she seemed to weigh every interaction, as if constantly assessing whether the humans around her could be trusted with something precious. "Maybe she does," Park agreed. "But that's not going to stop Colonel Harrison from arriving next week with a team of military interrogation specialists." Dr. Vasquez looked alarmed. "Lisa, you can't seriously be considering aggressive interrogation techniques on a clearly intelligent being who's shown no hostile intent." "I'm not considering anything," Park replied. "I'm telling you what's coming whether I like it or not. So if you're going to make a breakthrough, now would be a good time." David entered the alien's chamber with Park's warning weighing on his mind, trying to keep his emotional turmoil from affecting their session. But the moment he stepped through the doorway, he realized his efforts were futile. The alien woman, he'd started thinking of her as Arya, though he had no idea if that was remotely appropriate, was already looking at him with concern, her aurora eyes shifting to the deep blues he'd learned meant she was picking up on distress. "I'm sorry," he said, settling into his usual chair. "I'm having a difficult day, and I know you can sense that." She tilted her head in that questioning gesture, then rose from her position by the viewport and approached him with careful steps. When she was close enough, she reached out and gently touched his forehead, and David felt that mental resonance intensify until it was almost like hearing her voice in his thoughts, not words, but impressions of comfort, support, and what felt unmistakably like friendship. "You're trying to help," he said, understanding flooding through him. "Even though you don't know what's wrong, you want to make it better." Her eyes shifted to warm gold, and she nodded once. Then she did something she'd never done before. She sat down on the floor next to his chair, close enough that he could see the intricate patterns in her skin that looked like circuitry made of light. "I wish I could explain what's happening," David said, feeling the words pulled out of him by her patient attention. "There are people coming who want to treat you like a thing instead of a person. They're scared of what you might be able to do, so they want to force you to prove you're not dangerous." Her expression shifted to something that looked like sadness mixed with understanding, and David realized with a chill that this probably wasn't the first time she'd encountered beings who responded to the unknown with fear rather than curiosity. "I lost someone once," David found himself saying, the words coming out in the safe space her presence seemed to create. "My sister. She was part of the Mars colony disaster 5 years ago. Communication failure led to a cascade system breakdown, and by the time rescue ships arrived." He trailed off, but he didn't need to finish. The alien woman's eyes had shifted to deep violet, and the impression he got from their mental connection was of profound sympathy, not pity, but the recognition of someone who understood loss intimately. "I became a communication specialist because I never wanted to see people die because they couldn't understand each other," David continued. "And now I'm sitting here with someone from another world, trying to build a bridge between species, and I'm terrified that the people who are supposed to be helping are going to destroy everything." The alien woman reached out slowly and placed her hand over his, the same gesture she'd made at the viewport weeks before. But this time, the mental connection deepened until David could feel her emotions as clearly as his own: sadness for his loss, determination to help him succeed, and underneath it all, a loneliness so vast it made his own grief seem small by comparison. "You've lost people too," he said, understanding hitting him like a physical blow. "Not just separated, lost. Gone forever." She nodded once, her eyes now flowing with colors he'd never seen before. Deep purples shot through with silver that spoke of mourning and remembrance. Through their connection, he caught fragmentary impressions: ships scattered across impossible distances, voices that would never answer again, the weight of being the only survivor of something terrible. "I'm so sorry," David whispered, and meant it more deeply than he'd ever meant anything. Her hand squeezed his gently, and through their connection came something that felt like gratitude, not just for his sympathy, but for his willingness to see her pain and acknowledge it without trying to fix it or explain it away. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the mental resonance between them creating a space of shared understanding that needed no words. Finally, the alien woman stood and moved to one of the wall displays, touching it with her fingertips until it showed star patterns that David was beginning to recognize as maps. She pointed to a region of space that looked empty to his eyes, then touched her chest and made a gesture that encompassed everything around them. The meaning was clear: "This is where I came from, and now I'm here." "How long have you been traveling?" David asked. She held up her hands, fingers extended, then repeated the gesture multiple times. More than he could easily count, but David got the impression that the number itself wasn't as important as the weight of time it represented. "Years," he said. "Decades, maybe." "Searching for, what?" She moved back to the viewport and pressed both palms against it, looking out at the stars with an expression of profound longing. Through their connection, David caught impressions of other ships, other voices calling across the void, the desperate hope of finding family scattered among the infinite darkness. "You're looking for the rest of your people," David realized. "The ones who got separated when, whatever happened to your world happened." She turned back to him and nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears that looked like liquid starlight. She touched the communication device he'd brought for their session, and it began playing that haunting alien music again. But this time, David could hear the pattern in it, the call-and-response structure that suggested it wasn't just art but a form of long-range communication. "It's a beacon," he said in wonder. "You've been broadcasting, hoping they'll hear you and respond." Her smile was radiant, transforming her entire face with joy at being understood. She nodded eagerly, then made a gesture that indicated the music, the station around them, and finally David himself. "You want my help," he said, pieces clicking together in his mind. "Not just with communication, but with amplifying your signal. Using human technology to boost your beacon so it can reach farther into space." She nodded again, her eyes cycling through colors that spoke of hope and determination. Through their mental connection, David felt her certainty that this was possible, that human and alien technology could work together to create something neither could achieve alone. "I'll help you," David said without hesitation. "Whatever it takes, we'll find a way to get your message out there." The alien woman's expression shifted to something David had never seen before, absolute trust mixed with gratitude so profound it made his chest ache. She stepped forward and, for the first time since she'd arrived, initiated an embrace, her arms wrapping around him in a gesture that felt like a promise of friendship across the void between species. As David returned the embrace, feeling the warmth of truly alien skin and the rhythm of a heart that beat to a different tempo than human hearts, he realized that somewhere in the past weeks he'd stopped thinking of her as Subject Phi or even Aria. She'd become something much simpler and infinitely more complex, a friend who needed help finding her way home. "David," Dr. Vasquez's voice came through his earpiece, thick with emotion, "you need to know that every sensor in Section C is detecting quantum resonance patterns we've never recorded. Whatever just happened between you two, it's changing both of your neural patterns in ways we don't understand." David looked into the alien woman's aurora eyes, seeing his own reflection there alongside colors that had no names in any human language, and realized that maybe some changes were worth the risk. Maybe building bridges between worlds required being willing to let those worlds change you in return. "I know," he said softly, speaking to both Dr. Vasquez and the alien woman who still held him in that promise of friendship. "And I think that might be exactly what's supposed to happen." The interrogation chamber had been designed to be intimidating, with harsh white lighting and recording equipment that hummed with electronic menace. Colonel James Harrison sat across from the alien woman with the kind of rigid posture that suggested he viewed this as a military debriefing rather than a conversation between sapient beings. David stood behind the observation glass, his hands clenched into fists as he watched the woman he'd come to think of as his friend endure what amounted to psychological torture disguised as scientific inquiry. Her aurora eyes had dimmed to flat gray, and she sat with the stillness of someone trying to disappear into themselves. "Subject Phi has demonstrated technopathic capabilities that could pose a significant security risk," Colonel Harrison was saying, his voice carrying the mechanical precision of someone reading from a prepared script. "We need to understand the extent of these abilities and their potential applications." Dar. Vasquez, standing beside David in the observation room, looked like she was fighting the urge to storm into the interrogation chamber. "This is barbaric. She's clearly in distress." "Her distress levels are within acceptable parameters," Harrison replied through the comm system. "And her continued silence suggests either an inability to communicate or a deliberate refusal to cooperate with Earth security protocols." David watched as the alien woman, he refused to think of her as Subject Phi anymore, flinched slightly at Harrison's tone. Through the mental connection they developed, he could feel echoes of her emotional state, fear, confusion, and a growing sense of betrayal that made his chest ache with sympathetic pain. "She understands every word you're saying," David said into his comm unit. "And she's choosing not to respond because she doesn't trust you." "Sterling, you're not authorized to participate in this debriefing," Harrison replied coldly. "Your emotional attachment to the subject has compromised your objectivity." "My emotional attachment," David shot back, "is called basic human decency. Something you might want to try." In the interrogation chamber, the alien woman's head turned slightly toward the observation window, as if she could sense David's presence through the reinforced glass. Her eyes shifted from gray to the deep violet he associated with her more contemplative moods, and he felt that familiar mental resonance strengthen slightly. "She knows you're here," Dr. Vasquez said softly. "Her neural patterns just changed." Colonel Harrison noticed the shift as well, his expression hardening with what looked like satisfaction. "Interesting. The subject shows increased responsiveness when Sterling is present. Perhaps we should explore that connection more directly." "Absolutely not," David said, moving toward the door. "I won't be used as leverage against someone who's done nothing but show friendship and trust." "You'll do what's necessary for Earth's security," Harrison replied, "or you'll be removed from this project permanently." David paused with his hand on the door control, weighing his options. Through the mental link he shared with the alien woman, he could feel her growing distress as the interrogation continued. Her neural patterns were shutting down, retreating into some kind of protective state that Dr. Vasquez's instruments were reading as analogous to a coma. "She's going into psychic shock," Dr. Vasquez announced, alarm clear in her voice. "Pulses dropping, neural activity decreasing rapidly. Colonel, you need to stop this immediately." Harrison leaned forward, his voice taking on a harder edge. "Subject Phi, your continued silence is being interpreted as hostile non-cooperation. If you don't demonstrate willingness to communicate, we'll be forced to consider more invasive analysis techniques." The alien woman's eyes flickered once, a flash of something that might have been defiance, before dimming to complete gray. Her body went limp in the chair, and the monitoring equipment began emitting warning sounds as her life signs dropped to barely detectable levels. "That's it," David said, overriding the door controls with his security clearance. "I'm ending this." He burst into the interrogation chamber just as the alien woman collapsed completely, her silver hair spilling across the metal table like liquid starlight. David caught her before she could hit the floor, feeling the alarming coolness of her skin and the barely perceptible flutter of her pulse. "Get medical down here immediately," he ordered, cradling her unconscious form. Through their mental connection, he could feel her consciousness retreating to some deep, protected place where the harsh lights and hostile voices couldn't reach. "Sterling, step away from the subject," Harrison commanded, but David ignored him, focusing entirely on the dying woman in his arms. "I'm sorry," he whispered to her, knowing she could hear him even in her unconscious state. "I should have protected you better. I should have found a way to make them understand." Dr. Vasquez rushed in with medical equipment, her hands flying over sensors and scanners as she tried to assess the alien woman's condition. "She's not just unconscious, she's actively shutting down her neural processes. It's like she's choosing to stop existing rather than endure any more of this. Can you bring her back?" David asked, his voice tight with fear. "I don't know," Vasquez admitted. "This isn't a medical condition I can treat with human medicine. It's psychological trauma manifesting as physiological shutdown." David looked down at the alien woman's peaceful face, noting how young she looked without the weight of constant wariness in her expression. "She trusted us. She trusted me. And we let her down." Colonel Harrison stood behind them, his expression unreadable. This reaction suggests significant psychological fragility. Perhaps the subject isn't suitable for standard interrogation protocols. "Perhaps," David said, his voice carrying an edge of barely controlled anger, "the subject is a scared refugee who's been separated from her family and doesn't understand why the people she thought were friends are suddenly treating her like an enemy." For the next 48 hours, David refused to leave the medical bay where the alien woman lay in her self-imposed coma. Dr. Vasquez had moved her to a more comfortable room with softer lighting and peaceful surroundings, but her condition remained unchanged, alive but unreachable, her consciousness hidden somewhere deeper than human medicine could follow. David talked to her constantly, sharing stories about his life, playing the music she'd enjoyed, describing the stars visible through the medical bay's viewport. He told her about his sister's death, about his dreams of building bridges between worlds, about the loneliness he'd felt before meeting her and how their friendship had given him hope for something better. "I know you can hear me," he said during the second night, when exhaustion was making his voice hoarse. "And I know you're scared. But you don't have to hide anymore. Harrison's been reassigned, and Earth Command is sending a diplomatic team instead of military interrogators. People who understand that first contact should be about building relationships, not gathering intelligence." Her eyes remained closed, but David thought he felt a slight strengthening of their mental connection, like a distant voice calling through fog. "Your music is still playing through the station's communication array," he continued. "Dar. Vasquez figured out how to integrate your beacon signal with our deep space transmitters. We're broadcasting your call across a much wider area than your escape pod ever could have reached." This time he was certain, her fingers moved slightly, and her breathing deepened just a fraction. We're going to help you find your people, David promised. Not because we want something from you, but because it's the right thing to do. Because you're not Subject Phi or a security risk or a source of alien technology. You're a person who deserves to be reunited with her family. Her eyes fluttered open, still gray but with the faintest hint of color beginning to return. She looked directly at him, and through their mental connection came an impression of gratitude mixed with cautious hope. "Welcome back," David said softly, taking her hand in his. "I was worried we'd lost you permanently." She squeezed his fingers gently, her eyes slowly cycling through colors as her consciousness fully returned to the present moment. When she tried to sit up, David helped her, noting how frail she seemed after her ordeal. "Water," he offered, holding a cup to her lips. She drank slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. When she finished, she touched his hand and looked directly into his eyes with an intensity that made him feel like she was looking straight through to his soul. And then, for the first time since she'd arrived at the station, she spoke. "David." Her voice was like wind chimes and distant thunder, carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in his bones. But more than the sound, it was the way she said his name, with perfect pronunciation and inflection that suggested she'd been listening to every conversation, learning not just his language but the subtle emotional nuances of how humans used words to convey meaning. David felt tears running down his cheeks, though he wasn't entirely sure why. "You've been able to speak all along." She nodded once, her aurora eyes now flowing with warm gold and gentle blue. Through their mental connection came impressions of explanation. Speaking was sacred to her people, names especially so. Words carried power, and she had been waiting to find someone worthy of her true voice. "My name," she said carefully, each word shaped with deliberate precision, "is Lireleth of the Deep Current, daughter of star-singer Thesandra, seeker of the scattered song." "Lireleth," David repeated, feeling the alien syllables roll across his tongue. "It's beautiful." Her smile was radiant, transforming her entire face with joy. "David Sterling," she said, and the way she spoke his name made it sound like music. "Friend across the void. Bridge builder between worlds. Thank you for waiting." "Thank you for trusting me with your voice," David replied, understanding that something profound had just shifted between them. "Now, let's figure out how to get you home." 3 months after Lireleth spoke his name for the first time, David stood in the communication center of New Byzantium watching the most complex signal analysis humanity had ever attempted. The station's deep space arrays had been modified with ethereal biotechnology, creating a hybrid system that could broadcast across dimensional boundaries human science barely understood. Contact established with Deep Current Fleet Vessel Whisper of Ancient Tides, Lieutenant Torres announced from the primary communication station. "They're requesting direct interface with Lireleth." David looked across the room to where his friend stood at the center of a web of bioluminescent fibers that connected her directly to the station's enhanced communication array. Her skin pulsed with patterns of light that synchronized with the alien technology, and her aurora eyes had taken on colors so vivid they seemed to generate their own illumination. "Lireleth," he said softly, not wanting to interrupt her concentration but needing to know she was all right. Her eyes opened and focused on him immediately, and through their mental connection came impressions of joy so intense it made his heart race. "They found us, David. My mother's ship, my cousin's research vessel, 3 family groups we thought were lost forever. They're all coming." Dr. Vasquez looked up from her monitoring station, her face bright with excitement. "The quantum resonance patterns are incredible. She's not just communicating with them, she's sharing emotional states, memory fragments, even sensory data. It's like she's giving them a complete picture of everything that's happened since she arrived." "How long until they arrive?" David asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. The past months working with Lireleth had become the most meaningful period of his life, and the thought of saying goodbye made his chest ache with preemptive loss. 6 days, Lireleth replied, her voice carrying harmonics of anticipation mixed with something that felt remarkably like sadness. "The deep current travels slowly when carrying many ships, but my mother refuses to leave anyone behind again. Commander Park, who had become much more supportive since Colonel Harrison's reassignment, stepped forward with a tactical display. "We're reading 12 vessels in their formation, ranging from what appear to be family ships to larger community vessels. No weapon signatures, but their energy output suggests technology centuries ahead of ours. They're not coming as conquerors," Lireleth assured her, though she kept her Aurora eyes fixed on David's face. "The Ethereals learned long ago that taking by force creates only emptiness. We come seeking harmony, offering partnership to those who choose to accept it." Dr. Vasquez was practically vibrating with scientific excitement. "Lireleth, the communication techniques your people use. If we could adapt them for human space travel, it would revolutionize everything. Ships could coordinate across vast distances, colonies could maintain real-time contact with Earth, exploration missions could share discoveries instantaneously. My people would be honored to share such knowledge," Lireleth replied, "with those who understand that communication is about building connections, not gathering advantages." David felt that familiar tightness in his chest as he realized how much was about to change. "What happens now? Do you go back to your people and resume the life you had before?" Lireleth's expression grew contemplative, her eyes shifting to the deep violet he associated with her most serious thoughts. Through their mental connection, he felt her wrestling with complex emotions, relief at finding her family, gratitude for her time among humans, and something that felt like reluctance to leave what she'd built here. "The David I knew when I arrived was searching for purpose," she said finally. "The man who stands before me now has found it in building bridges between worlds. Would such a person be interested in helping establish the first joint human ethereal embassy?" David blinked, not entirely sure he'd heard correctly. "You're offering me a job. I'm offering you a chance to do what you've always dreamed of, facilitate understanding between species who speak different languages of the heart." Lireleth's smile was radiant. "The Ethereals have much to learn about human resilience and creativity. And humans have much to gain from understanding deeper forms of communication. It would mean leaving Earth," David said slowly, thinking through the implications. "Living among aliens, learning completely new ways of existing." "It would mean living among friends," Lireleth corrected gently. "The ethereal concept of family extends beyond blood relations to include all those who choose to share the deep current. You have already proven yourself worthy of such inclusion." Dr. Vasquez looked between them with the expression of someone watching history unfold. "David, do you understand what she's offering? You'd be humanity's first permanent cultural ambassador to an alien species. The things you could learn, the bridges you could build. The loneliness of being the only human among beings who communicate in ways I'm only beginning to understand," David added, though without bitterness. He'd learned to appreciate honesty in all its forms during his time with Lireleth. "You would not be alone," Lireleth said, stepping closer to him with that fluid grace that still took his breath away. "The connection we have forged runs deeper than species barriers. Where I go, part of your heart travels with me. Where you remain, part of my soul stays behind. This is the nature of true communication, it changes both participants permanently." David looked around the communication center that had become his second home, noting how the human and ethereal technologies had merged into something neither species could have created alone. He thought about his sister, lost to a communication failure that better understanding might have prevented. He thought about the loneliness he'd felt before meeting Lireleth, and the sense of purpose that had grown from their friendship. "When do we leave?" he asked, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. Lireleth's joy blazed through their mental connection like sunrise, and her physical smile was radiant enough to illuminate the entire room. "The Deep Current Fleet travels to the Veil Nebula, where my people have established a temporary gathering point for the scattered song. From there, we will help build new communities, explore unknown regions of space, and teach young ethereals about the species who saved one of their own through simple kindness." "It sounds like the adventure of several lifetimes," David replied, feeling excitement beginning to overcome his nervousness. "It sounds like the beginning of something unprecedented in galactic history," Dr. Vasquez added, already pulling up research proposals on her tablet. David, you'll need to document everything: language patterns, social structures, technological integration possibilities. This could revolutionize xenoanthropology as a field. Commander Park stepped forward with what looked like official documents. Earth Command has authorized the establishment of a permanent liaison position with any friendly alien species we encounter. Congratulations, Sterling, you just became humanity's first xenocultural ambassador. David stared at the papers that would change his life forever, then looked at Lireleth, whose aurora eyes were cycling through every color he'd learned to recognize and several he was still discovering. Through their mental connection came impressions of anticipation, gratitude, and something that felt remarkably like coming home. 6 days to prepare for the rest of my life, he said, shaking his head in amazement. 6 days to celebrate the friendship that made it possible, Lireleth replied, her musical voice carrying harmonics of affection that needed no translation. As the communication center buzzed with activity around them, technicians integrating ethereal biotechnology, scientists documenting unprecedented breakthrough protocols, and diplomats drafting humanity's first interspecies cultural exchange agreements, David felt the same sense of rightness he'd experienced during those early sessions when he and Lireleth had first learned to understand each other without words. Some connections, he realized, transcended the boundaries of species, language, and even time itself. What they'd built together was more than friendship. It was proof that the universe favored those who chose understanding over fear, cooperation over conquest, and trust over suspicion. Lireleth, he said, using her full name the way she'd taught him, with emphasis on each syllable like notes in a song. David Sterling of Earth, she replied, giving his name the same musical treatment, friend of the deep current, brother to the scattered song. Thank you, he said simply, knowing she would understand everything he meant by those 2 words. Gratitude for her friendship, for the purpose she'd helped him find, for the trust she'd placed in him, and for the future they would build together among the stars. Her smile was answer enough, bright as starlight and warm as coming home after a long journey through the dark spaces between worlds. Through their mental connection came one final impression, clear as spoken words: the adventure is just beginning. And as the first ships of the Deep Current Fleet appeared on the station's long-range sensors, their bioluminescent hulls pulsing with welcome signals, David Sterling prepared to leave everything he'd ever known for the sake of everything he'd never dared to dream possible. The alien woman who had spoken his name had given him something more valuable than words. She'd given him a place in a larger story, one written in the language of friendship across the infinite spaces between stars.